Okay. So again, as I started off a little bit late, this is interesting because this is the first time I've ever done this across three completely different time zones. So for those of you in Canada, this is good evening, good night, because it's about 11 p.m. out here. For people from South Africa, good morning, and out from Singapore, I think it's good afternoon right now. So thank you all for finding time and coming today to join as part of the panel discussion. My name is D. Philip Alex, or Alex, and I'm the founder and chief disruptor with Next Evolution Ventures, which is an innovation and think tank social enterprise focusing on making changes in the areas of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I'm assuming every one of you can hear us. If you can, just put a message in the chat box just telling us, yes, you can hear us and where you're from. So go ahead, feel free to do that. In the meantime, in the interest of time, I'm going to get started. And as I'm before we get started, we'll just go through some ground rules. So try and keep your microphones mute during the conversation. Between the panelists, I would say, yes, it's okay to keep it open. And if you have any questions in general for the panelists during the presentation, put them into the chat. I'll be monitoring them, and I'll try and incorporate that into the conversation. And otherwise, I've got some time set towards the end of the conversation to allow you to have a Q&A session with the panelists. Just know that the session is being recorded and will be posted through our website and our YouTube channel later on in the month. So are we all ready to start with this conversation? It's a very interesting conversation. And as I've been going through this conversation, a lot has been coming through with the connections that I've had with my son, who's about 8 years old. And it's just trying to see the things through the lens of a child and an adolescent as they're trying to navigate through a world, and one that's very different today, especially with the current COVID climate and so on. So we've got three amazing speakers that we have with us today, and they're from across the globe. I'm going to start with our panelists from Johannesburg, South Africa, Samantha McLeod. So you can see her bio out here, but here's a few facts about her. So she's been a registered clinical psychologist with 20 years of practice, and she's the owner and director of Feeling Smart. Her corporate career began at ICAS, where an employee wellness program grew into a talent management and assessment, training and facilitation, coaching for performance, on-site clinical psychotherapy, executive coaching, and corporate wellness consulting. She has also obtained her MBA from Milk Park Business School. She has a special interest in working with psychiatric inpatients in multidisciplinary setting with a focus on individuals, couples, and families from a systemic framework. She also works with memory care with a focus on psychosocial assessment and treatment of the elderly and their caregiver support system, focusing on neurocognitive disorders. Her therapeutic stance is systemic, psychodynamic, CBT, BWRT, and schema-based. So thank you, Samantha, for coming and being part of this panel. Truly amazing to have you here and be part of our session. Our next two panelists are from Singapore and are both with the Cerebral Palsy Alliance in Singapore. So the first person that I'm going to introduce is Parandaman Techanamurthy, and I hope that I said that right. He's a pediatric forensic psychologist with 8 years of experience of working in a specialist child and adolescent mental health team for children who are placed in residential care. He's a specialist chartered forensic psychologist with the British Psychological Society. Paran consults families where there are a complex child protection and safety concerns and repeated patterns of psychological trauma and abuse which are relevant to child mental health and developmental trauma. In particular, he provides clinical and forensic psychodiagnostic assessments, risk assessments, child custodial evaluation, treatments, and psychotherapy. Our final panelist for today is Tibia Lakshmi. She's also with the Cerebral Palsy Alliance in Singapore. She completed her master's in clinical psychology at Royal Holloway University of London and is currently a graduate member with the British Psychological Society. With CPAS, she works with a wide age group of clients from EIPIC students to adult clients at GROW. She has been trained in administrating psychodiagnostic assessments such as WPPSI and WASI and has undergone training for administering dynamic assessments. Tibia has also been trained in therapy services like child group leader training for social skills and problem solving curriculum, CBT, schema therapy, sensory motor arousal, regulation treatment, and trauma-focused CBT. Thank you, Samantha, Paran, and Tibia for choosing to be with us and engaging in a much-needed conversation today, especially in today's day and age. So I'm going to start this conversation with question straight away to all of you, and I'm going to start with Samantha and followed by Paran and Tibia in that order. And the question that I have for you is, what is your story and what got you into the field of mental health? So Samantha. Samantha, I think you need to unmute yourself, please.
I am so sorry. Thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm often asked, what made you become a psychologist? And I always say psychology found me. I didn't find it. I like you mentioned, I've been practicing for 20 years, but I think my greatest learning has been becoming a mother. I have twin 10-year-old girls, and having a growth mindset or mentality, I'm always wanting to learn. And I actually mentioned to them this morning that I think my greatest learning is coming from them. And that is why I really like the topic that we have today. I have my own private practice, and I work at a psychiatric clinic called the Akiso Clinic in Johannesburg, where we see psychiatric inpatients. In particular, we have a young adolescents program there, where we work with adolescents and their families. And it's, you know, the reason why I got into feeling smart and I started feeling smart was I saw these youngsters between the ages of 13 and 18 coming into a psychiatric clinic. And I want to find a way to prevent that. And we know with research that we can prevent that. If we give them the right skills and the right tools, we can prevent mental illness later in life. And that is my story.
Thank you, Samantha. Paran, why don't you take a shot at this?
So I think just like Samantha, my induction into psychology is probably because I kind of got fascinated by how humans behaved and stuff, and then that got me into pursuing the bachelor's, and then it's when I started doing my master's and my specialization in forensic psychology. That's when I got to know how human beings thought and reacted, and how mental disorders could actually contribute to dysfunction. And when I started going to my subspecialty in working with children and families, that's when I understood that there's so much stuff that we can do as clinicians. And just like how Samantha said that she learned from her kids, I think my point of understanding and learning literally came from the kids that I saw on a day-to-day basis. So every child teaches me something that that university did not teach, or the books did not teach. and so it's an ongoing journey and stuff like that. And so right, I have a 3-year-old girl, and she teaches me something on a daily basis. So yeah, it's my small story.
Thank you very much. Tibia, up on to you.
Okay, so for me, I mean, I feel like I'm still relatively new in this field. I started off in research a bit first. So we were doing research on, you know, academic progression for children, and that kind of spiked my interest in actually, you know, changing to a more one-on-one kind of work with children, because I found research a bit too, there was too much stats, there was too much processes in it, and I wanted to feel a bit more like, you know, that I was making a difference. So I went on to do my master's in clinical psych, and then I knew I wanted to work with children because for me, the understanding of like behavior and all that was very interesting from the start. And then I realized that, oh, you know, as children, that's where we learn most of our experiences, and that's how, you know, it shapes our lives as adults. So to me, like, understanding children's behavior and understanding their experiences was something that was very interesting to me. And so I focused on finding a job that was related to children. And when I started working at CPAS was when I first got my first-hand experience working with children with special needs. So that was a very humbling process, and I think I learned a lot from it, and definitely that contributed to my understanding of mental health as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So a lot of it, viewers, I love the personal stories that I'm hearing, especially with the kids and experiences. I think let's get a little bit more into the depth of it, because we're here to have a very serious conversation. We're here to have a very, very detailed conversation. So all of you, the three of you have been in this field for a while. What has been your observation on what children go through when navigating through our world? Like whether you're a baby or a child or an adolescent, what has it been that you're going through? I'm going to start this with Paran first, and then followed by Tibia. So,
I think there's lots of things that actually happen. You know, I think it starts from when it's quite a complex process, right? So the moment the mother conceives, right, and her experiences may affect the child from an in utero perspective. So when, for example, if a whole pregnancy experience has been an experience where it's full of joy and there's a nice embodiment process to it and stuff like that, and so the child that comes out that's being given birth to kind of exhibits that sort of happiness and stuff like that. And in the process that the mother experiences some form of challenges. It could be marital challenges, it could be financial challenges that prevents the mother from going for prenatal checks and stuff like that. There's a lot of research that goes on to show that there's some form of effects that can be seen even before the child is given birth to. So in utero experiences, which a lot of us think may not be helpful, or is something that we should not pay attention to, actually plays a huge role in how the child sees and views the world. And in the event that the mom experiences lots of challenges before giving birth, it sets a whole role of dysfunction, not only for the mother but also for the child. You know, I think lots of people, the expectation that we have is that as a child, the child would not understand anything. You know, the child is 3 days old, the child is 4 days old, and the child is not able to visually connect to the world. But the child is able to, you know, from audio perspective, the child is able to connect to the world, right? And initially, this for the first 2-3 months, the brain stem of the child is configured in such a way, it's what we call the primitive brain stem. It's configured in such a way, there's a lot of what we call extra emphasis on sensory motor input and survival. So the little quarrels or the disengagement sometimes that the parents may have, right, would have a direct impact on the child. You know,
so I just want to step in here
Sure.
a little bit here just to understand the thing. So you're talking about it from the basic sense of just a normal relationship that you're having with those, and not the ones that where a child is going through a lot more trauma when you have a mom that's an alcoholic and it's the fetal alcohol syndrome and so on. So you're just talking about just like it could be either or, right?
Yes, yes. So in the event that, you know, where there's a lot more complexities that comes into place, for example, you know, the family comprises of a heterosexual couple who are dependent on substance and stuff like that, then the complexities are more, because then there's an expectation that there would not be, that the parents would not be regulated effectively and stuff like that, and that impacts not only the child in utero, but also when the child is given birth to, the mother or the parents would not be able to engage the child effectively, and for a simple reason. For example, the parents would not know how to play with the child. So it's as simple as not being able to play with the child, you know. So we don't need to go and look at very complex system, right? Because I've seen in my clinical practice where parents have come into the room and saying, "Can you teach me how to play?" You know, but then we look at what we call probably intergenerational transmission of trauma or attachment. Right, and that makes the whole system very, very complex. And this not only affects the child from a developmental perspective, it also affects the child from an emotional perspective. Everything that the child sees or views becomes risk, right? So they go on this what we call the fight, flight, and freeze. You know, that's when clinicians or people would think that the child is dysregulating, or what we would normally hear as, or they're trying to gain attention and stuff like that. Essentially, they're trying to connect to you, but just like how the parent is unable to play, the child finds it difficult to connect to the world in a very appropriate way. So technically speaking, socialization happen around 3.5. That's when developmental aggression actually starts coming down and socialization takes over, because the child gets exposed to educational institutions, your nurseries and stuff like that. And so the aggression comes down. But however, what you would look at, such kids who go through this sort of complex lifestyles, you probably see the reverse. You probably see developmental aggression going up, and then lack of socialization coming in.
Yeah, so I have a question for you related to this at a later point, but I'll get to Tibia first and then Samantha, and then we'll get back to some of the questions that I have based on what your conversation has been so far. So Tibia, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So personally, yeah, my observation is it's quite similar to what Farhan said in terms of like attachment being the foundation of it. I think the child-parent attachment is ideally what helps the child navigate through their world. That is their first experience, right? They're in a home setting, with their parents. So that's where they're learning all this, all the skills from. And I think based on what I've seen also, yeah, most children who go through like, come from a traumatic background and all this, they do have difficulties expressing all these intense emotions because they're probably they've not observed how it's expressed appropriately. For example, in a family that there's abuse and violence. So when there's such cases, parents don't probably they don't express the emotions properly, and then the child learns from it, and then that's how they grow. They probably also, like parents said, there's that intergenerational transmission, right? The child learns from it as well. So yeah, so when from the kids that we have seen also at our organization as well, the observation is children mostly learn from their experiences from home, and that's what actually leads them to probably having all these or what people call problematic behaviors at the end of the day. There's also the saying that no child is a bad child. It's kind of because they have all these emotions, they have all this especially new complex emotions that they're learning as they grow up, right? And then they're not able to understand how to express it. They're not able to relate to how to manage it, how to regulate their emotions. And then it's a full-on explosion of emotions or explosion of problem behaviors that occurs. And that's how they kind of learn, and that's because they aren't taught how to self-regulate on their own.
Okay, so Samantha, do you want to chime in a little bit and share your experience based on what you've seen?
Thank you, Alex. I definitely agree with my colleagues. I think that they're spot on. I think attachment is very important for development, all the way from infancy through to geriatric. Attachment forms the basis of our psyche, and it forms the basis of our relationships. Just from my perspective, what I've seen with children in terms of how they navigate through our world is children are very simplistic in the way they see the world. Their brain isn't fully emotionally developed. So the world is very simple. It's very black and white. Either you love me or you don't love me. Either you care for me or you don't care for me. And that feeds through to adolescent as well. I also find that my adolescents have very, very good emotional intelligence. They understand some things that even we as adults don't seem to understand or grasp, looking at all the differences in the different generations that we've come through. So I think that there's always been that generation gap in terms of adults trying to understand kids, and it's hard for us to put ourselves in their shoes and see the world through their eyes. But it is a beautiful world through their eyes.
Okay. Thank you, because you said a few things and I was like, oh, very simplistic. When I look at my own son, at times I go like, wow, I always have to have to be 2 steps ahead of his thinking because he's got something up his sleeve almost every single time. But at the end of the day, when it comes to it's really those 2 words. He just wants to know, Dad, do you really love me or do you not love me? It's just tell me. And that's all it is. And it's very interesting how you said it. It's very simplistic in many ways, yet I try to make it more complicated in many ways because I'm always trying to see what is he up to.
Yes. It's the many colors that adults see the world through.
And this question is all for all of you, but based on the conversation that you just had with me right now, I'm just wondering, and might be something that the audience is also going through, is you said social interactions play a huge role where, from when they're 3.5 years old onwards. How does this change with, different cultures and even like things like homeschooling and all those things, where there is that cutback in terms of connecting with other individuals. I know we'll talk a little bit about the pandemic in particular, but in general, when it comes to things like homeschooling and so on, do you see that changes the way that kids grow up to be? And if you have ideas and thoughts on those.
I think definitely, we often joke that the kids born these days are born with an iPad in one hand and a smartphone in the other hand, kind of thing, because they're so good with technology. And it has a lot to do with epigenetics, like Paran was saying earlier. What we learn as adults get passed through to our kids. So they're born in a digital age, and they know how to connect with technology a lot easier than they know how to connect with other people. And it's so important to take it back to social skills at the end of the day. I think that our kids are missing out on the social interaction and the relationship skills, because at the end of the day, as human beings, we're made to connect. We're made to interact. Our survival instinct in our mammalian brain is survival of the species, which means that you have to interact with other human beings and be social. And, studying online, being in lockdown, being forced to kind of just isolate can have detrimental effects on one's psyche, on one's development. But the other thing that I wanted to say, what I've learned about children, is that they are exceptionally resilient. They're much more resilient than adults are. And they adapt easily as well, because their brain isn't fixed. It's still growing. They're still learning. And it's not a huge train smash. They will learn to adapt. It's just that us as adults need to understand that their world is different to ours. I think you need to.
Paran and Tibia, would you like to chime in, please?
I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I've not seen kids that were homeschooled or anything, but I do agree with the technology part. Most of our kids that, when they use their iPads, or they're so used to not really observing the world outside, because they're so used to they're given these iPads, or they're given tablets to watch a show while they're eating, or when they're outside also, just to manage their behaviors, they're given iPads and all this. And that does reduce their social interactions. It does reduce their social skills in a way. But I think sometimes children learn through play as well. So when they are learning through play, they actually learn social skills through there as well. So it could be that it's through technology, but there may be games on these iPads that actually teaches them some of the social skills as well. So in that sense, there's still some learning happening. But of course, ideally, the situation would be go to a playground and find some kids to talk with and play with and interact with, rather than doing it on the iPad instead.
Okay, thank you. Paran?
Yeah, so when Divya were talking about this, the first thing I got reminded of is the bedtime when my daughter goes, when she has bedtime, she needs to have probably like one YouTube video or two YouTube videos to kind of put her to sleep and stuff like that. And I was thinking about what went in my head, as I was trying to find her a school, and what I was actually looking out for is the need for my daughter to connect, and it's for my daughter to go to a school where there's a lot of focus on play. And so what I actually met with, especially in this age, is so what's the issue with your child? Where do you think she should improve? Do you think she should get this sort of grades and stuff like that? So what I did was I went to a school where there was lots of focus on play, just like what Divya said. So the school focuses on stuff like making cakes, coming up with teas and making your own ice creams and stuff like that. So it's a very, very simple stuff. Going back to what we would have probably done as kids, going out to the fields, going out to the playgrounds, no iPads or very, very limited time. We had games and stuff like that. But yeah, so the focus was more on that. And I guess just like what Samantha says, the connection it gives us, it's huge. And in comparison, when we look at when isolation happened during COVID, where people struggle to live together as a family, you probably see lots of cases where child protection cases goes up, family violence cases goes up, couples getting divorced and stuff like that. It's because it's either we have not socialized enough or we do not know how to socialize when there's lots more time we need to spend. People wanted to go back to work, and we have always been clamoring for, I don't have time, I don't have enough time to spend with family. But ideally, when you get the time to spend, you do not know how to make sense, right? So in the event our children are engaged more on, like what Divya said, iPads and stuff like that, then, it becomes quite challenging. And I also do agree with Samantha, I think resilience is a huge portion of kids. But I think what we also need to be mindful is that the scientific knowledge on how they become resilient, what causes them to be resilient, it's still a huge question mark, especially from a forensic perspective. Where some children from dysfunctional families who really do well, and some children can't do well. At this stage, even scientists and practitioner psychologists are not able to make sense. What is this thing about resilience in kids? Why is it that some kids have this? And of course, there are a lot of factors, family and whatnot. But yeah, so it's still debatable. But yes, I agree with my colleagues Samantha and Divya that play is huge. I enjoy playing football with my daughter. So it's a very, very nice way, it's a very, very nice way of chilling out after looking at patients and stuff like that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think it's a good segue into getting a little bit more deeper into different factors and with different types of people, with kids as well. So specifically, I'm looking at about special needs kids, those who need physical as well as neuro-diversity related needs, foster kids, adopted kids, gender identity related issues, whether they identify as a different gender or so on and so on. How does this look different? Just in addition to the question that we're going as we're navigating through their world, how does that look different for them? Samantha, do you want to go first?
I think the world looks very different for them. It's all about creating safety. At the end of the day, they don't see the world the same way that we do, depending on where their difficulties lie. Special needs kids can either be very deeply emotional, or they can be kind of very cut off emotionally. They have learning difficulties. They have language difficulties. It comes down to that we need to be empathetic towards their needs and their struggles. Special needs kids, I find in South Africa especially, are forgotten. They get abandoned. We don't really have a welfare system or an education system that can cater well for them. They get marginalized, and they're very misunderstood. I know Tibia is the expert in this, so I'm going to hand that question over to her.
Tibia, over to you.
Yeah, I agree with the fact that, you know, they sometimes we don't take into account the limitations that they have sometimes. So for example, if a special needs kids, you know, there may be verbal limitations on how they express themselves, and, you know, we may struggle to understand them. But also sometimes it becomes an issue when we tend to dismiss it. You know, special needs children also have intense emotions and intense feelings, and all this gets dismissed when we don't understand them well enough. You know, we see it as behaviors that come about, you know, that all these tantrums that come about, that's probably because we don't understand what they're trying to say, what they're trying to showcase, or what is the emotions they're feeling at that point of time. And we tend to think of it as, okay, it's a full-on tantrum, that's all. So I think the difficulty comes when we're not able to see exactly what is it emotionally they are going through. It shouldn't be dismissed, it should be looked into, and we shouldn't just see it as a behavioral issue and, you know, go back a bit to finding out, okay, emotionally, are they, you know, are we giving them enough support? Especially, for example, when it comes to attachment as well. You know, children with special needs may face difficulty expressing their love for, you know, others, and sometimes that also causes a bit of I won't say tension, but it also creates a distance between the parent and the child as well, because it's not the typical way of connection. Probably like a simple touch is enough for a special needs child to feel loved, you know, versus maybe a neurotypical child, which may be a different way that you express love. But, you know, for a special needs child, we need to understand exactly what is it that they are craving for, what is it that they need at that point of time.
Thank you. Parent, would you like to share any thoughts?
Yeah, my perspective is I would like to look at it from a parent's angle. So when a mother gives birth to a child disabled or developmentally challenged, I think there's lots of things, you know, how she sees herself in a fast-paced world where there's a lot of premium given to being attractive, being able to do well, and stuff like that. And so what places her and the child and the immediate family, the type of stress they undergo. And then, is it me who has contributed to the dysfunction of the child? So that's another thing that they would need to be grappling with. And then the ongoing acceptance of the disability itself. It's a big issue. And not being able to grieve openly, you know, because you know, so for example, when someone passes on, you are able to grieve openly, and then it goes away. It's time bound, right? It's time bound. At that point of time, it's done and it's over with. But giving birth to a disabled or challenged child is not going to be time bound, because every other day you're going to see the child, and it's going to give you some form of reminders, a constant reminders of what the family, what the mother is facing. And that inevitably not only affects the mother, but also affects her caregiving abilities as well as parenting. And then, like what Tibia mentioned, the attachment. You know, so what could be a normal family subsystem could be complexly entangled when someone gives birth, when the mother gives birth to a child who may be developmentally challenged, and that probably gives rise to lots more other complex issues, which normally agencies, organizations may not give clear directions or provide interventions for and stuff like that. I think the focus is currently right now on how how are we going to help the child, you know, but no one focuses on the deep-seated emotional, existential emotions that the parents would be going through, you know, especially in this sort of world, right, where everything's happening so fast and stuff like that, you know. So yeah, so that's something we would need to think about, especially if we are going to design a system which is holistic in nature. So not only from a child perspective, but also from a parental perspective.
I think you raise a very good point in that, like, I never thought about it from that lens, and I think that's actually a good question, like good thing to look into, because I think there's no self-care or any type of emotional support that's available for parents that have challenged kids in many ways, because the whole, I don't like using this term of burden, but it tends to sound like that because of what they don't have the support to do to help them through the process, and they tend to create that set of like you said it really well, is like we've created an image of what a mom needs to look like. It's all about the attractiveness, the beauty of a lot of things, and how does that actually now reflect on them because of the child that they have. I'm sure they love the kid, everything in the same way, but they don't have that emotional support. I think that's a very good point to bring up, and I think it's something I would be looking at in terms of when we're building out systems to put into effect as part of that holistic piece. So in the interest of time, I'm going to actually move us a little bit along to the question on, you know, why is it important to look through the lens of that child? Like significantly get into that. And I do want to get the adult's perspective as well, because that makes a huge shift in how we go about changing the way we look at our kids or our students or different elements. So, Paran, I'm going to start with you on this.
Okay. That was kind of sudden, but yeah. I think as parents we have certain biasness when we look at our kids, and we may be influenced by how the world revolves around us, you know. And then there is always there's always this need to feel in control, because we are parents, and I just wanted to. This happened last night. Yeah, I went back home, and you know, I met my daughter, and I was like, you know, I'm on leave, so I would like to bring you to school tomorrow. And she was like, no, and she started crying and stuff like that. No, I don't want to go with you and stuff. And I said, oh, okay, fine. It's fine. Tell me when you think you're ready for me to accompany you, and so that's how it ended. You know, she might have thought that I may not bring that sort of fun element, or whatever the challenge she has. You know, so I was okay to give her that said, well, it's fine, just leave it at there. And so it's very, very important, you know, it's very, very important for us not to push our agenda and ask them, why do you not want me? Because it's not about me, right? It's not about my own sense of self, or my own sense of, oh, I'm a father and I should be doing this. It's essentially about them, right? It's about them. And what we need to understand is kids, right? So how they exhibit and how their behaviors come up is it's quite kind of sequential to what they experience, and how the brain forms as well, right? So from a primitive brain stem, where there's a lot of focus on fight, flight, and freeze, and then then it goes to what we call the limbic or the midbrain, where there's a lot of more focus on emotional development and attachment. And then you go to what we call the cortical brain, where there's a lot more thinking, learning, organization, and that's what we call the higher order hierarchy and stuff like that. That's when the reasoning happens and whatnot. So right now, when we're working with kids or when you're interacting with kids, I think it's important to kind of allow them to feel secure, allow them to understand that their thoughts or whatever is heard. So it's very, very important to actually engage them through their lens. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that one. Tibia, can you give me your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the necessity for us to actually look through their lens is for us to be able to understand what drives their behavior. What are they exactly seeking out? Like, for example, I think like Paran gave an example, right? So I also similarly read somewhere about this case and example where this mom was trying to get a child to get ready and go with her to see her grandmother. So that was what she was trying to do, and she wanted to comb the daughter's hair and bring her out, and the child refused it and profusely like threw a tantrum, threw the brush, and wanted to go back to her room, insistent that she didn't want to go to the grandma's place. So when the parent sees this kind of behavior, they would see it as, oh, this child doesn't want to go with me. This child doesn't enjoy going to see the grandma. Is just refusing to listen to my instructions. And then when later on, when the mom kind of asked the child, what is it that you're feeling so upset about? The mom actually went to the child's level and tried to understand the child a bit better. The child actually said that, actually, I don't like the way you tie my hair. And that actually led to her showing such tantrums. So it was nothing to do with the fact, like how parents said, it was nothing to do with the fact that you as a parent, wanting to bring a child and child refusing what you wanted. At the end of the day, maybe the child has some other reasons for it. And in this case, it was, she didn't like the way the hair was tied. Because in fact, she was, I think some friends at school made fun of her for it and everything. And so there's other reasons for it. And I think if, let's say, we don't communicate with them and we don't understand where this behavior comes from, it will just be a miscommunication between the adult and child. And I think that's why it's very, very important for us to kind of go down to their level and understand them a bit better.
Thank you, Tibia. I think that is a stunning example of
how
how
it was something I read. Yeah.
Children are so simple, and adults go and try and make this huge complex thing out of it. It's an interesting question. For me, I think, why do we as parents have children? What's the reason we have children? We want to have children. We want them to grow into healthy, functional, successful adults. That's what we want. We want to leave a legacy behind. And the best way for them to do that is for them to feel understood, to feel needed, to feel loved, to feel nurtured, cared for, and most importantly, like Paran was saying, to feel secure and safe. And the only way we can do this is if we go to their level and we learn to understand them and understand their needs, understand their love languages, and how to show them that they are safe and they are cared for and they are loved.
No, like as you guys were talking, there was few things that were going through my mind, because it put me back into when I grew up and when my parents were trying to discipline me. It was always I shouldn't say that they were not always this bad, but I'd say that there was the belt used to come out once in a while, and there was a forced attempt to do things. And so one of the notes that I did when Paran was talking was, one of the things that we tend to do as adults is tend to emotionally try and blackmail our kids without trying to understand what their thoughts are. So in your case, where you actually let it go, you let your daughter not share why she wanted to do it. But I think most parents would tend to start going with, oh, you just don't want to come with me. You don't love me. You don't care about, you don't want to do things with me. And that tends to be the way that adults tend to shift towards. So I like that you guys were talking about is, Tibia mentioned it is, let's step down to the level of the child and try and understand that as to where they're coming from. And your example was perfect on the ball, because I think it resonates with a lot of people, just to understand where many people are coming from. So thank you all for that response and thought process on this particular topic. We'll just move to the next question, is really starting to talk about challenges. What are the challenges and factors that children face, and what adults face as well? So Tibia, you're up on my list for the next person to start off this discussion. So give us your thoughts.
I think for children specifically, I think the challenge that they sometimes face is the intensity of emotions, especially when they're starting out young and all these new emotions come up. And even complex emotions, for example, jealousy, all these kind of complex emotions that they may not be exposed to. And then they're just starting out and they're learning about it. And they're just not able to regulate themselves. You know, they haven't learned the skills needed to regulate themselves or make themselves feel better. And I think that's a challenge for them, because when there is heightened emotions and they don't feel safe, they don't feel secure, these emotions just pour out. And, you know, that's when you see in the supermarkets where children floor and start whining and crying and all these behaviors come up. It's because they're not able to self-regulate. They probably haven't learned that at that point of time. So sometimes it also leaves them confused. This intensity of emotions leave them confused. Like, oh, I'm feeling so intense and this is how I pour it out, but they have not learned how can they, like, you know, we tell adults every time, keep calm and move on, right? But, you know, a child needs to also learn how to self-regulate to keep themselves calm as well. So I think that's one of the major challenges that a child faces probably as they grow up and they come across intense emotions. I think even when teenagers come across intense emotions also later on in life also, there's a need for them to understand how to regulate themselves as well.
Okay, thank you. Samantha, up to back to you, just to give your thoughts on this particular topic. You may need to unmute yourself. I think we might have lost her for a bit. Pardon, would you like to go out while she gets back?
I think there are lots of challenges that the children these days actually face. I think probably one of the biggest challenges is probably the expectations of parents. The expectation to succeed in this world, at least from an academic perspective, and the very fact that if you don't succeed from an academic perspective, then what the world is going to be like for you, because that's naturally how, at least at this point of time, that's actually how the world kind of measures your success. So and that kind of is something that the child is put through as young as 3, 4, and 5, because they go through series of exams and stuff like that. So whatever the children are set out to do or made out to do, for example, play, is actually lost. And so it's the play is lost, and the focus then goes on to, you know, doing well in your life, you know. And I can still remember we had like I had conversations with my wife where we were thinking, you know, I think she should not be going to school until 5, and we had this natural explosion, not only within the inner family, but also within the society that surrounds us. That's something interesting, because normally kids actually go to school, are inducted into school as early as 2.5 and stuff like that, and so they go through lots of this sort of pressures that we as parents have kind of normalized. And what we have actually taken away from them is what they are essentially supposed to be doing as kids. They are supposed to be playing, right? They are supposed to be going out and socializing, getting to know kids and stuff like that. So that's a major part of which is missing, right? I can still remember there's this conversation I had with a prof from UK, and she's an expert on kids who are diagnosed with ADHD, and she says that the biggest thing that ADHD medication does to kids is it takes away the play. It takes away the allow for you. It takes away the fact that the child is able to tumble. That sort of zestiness and the sunniness that the child we normally describe a child as, and then the burden or the stuff that the child starts carrying is getting the 80 marks or 90 marks and stuff like that. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't have Samantha here yet. I might be having some technical issues, but I think I'm going to still continue that conversation a little bit more on. It was a touchback to the previous thing about the challenges that adults face, and I really want to explore this part because we talk about it in the sense that adults, we're going through a very fast-paced life at this point in time, very much fast-paced, and this pandemic, which is potentially the next question as well that I have with you, is the pandemic has prompted us to actually kind of stall our life a little bit, and we have to face a lot of things, and I'm sure that once we get a little bit into 2021, 2022, the stats are going to show that there's going to be potentially more divorces that have happened than previous years, and pending to the fact that people have to actually sit and have conversations, have talks. So what are your thoughts on that component of what are adults struggling with? Samantha, we'll come back to you to talk about the children's side of things, but we're just going to roll a little bit with the adult side of things at this point in time.
Thank you.
So, Tibia, would you like to give your thoughts first on from the adult side of things?
Yeah, so I mean, like you mentioned, right, the pandemic has kind of changed how everyone works. People started working from home, and that it also meant more hours with their children. Everyone's in the same household and all this. And I think the challenge that parents were probably facing at that point of time is, okay, how do I engage my child? They're probably so used to sending the child from to schools, and then having that 4 to 5 hours remaining before they go to bed. They're able to know, like, okay, 4 to 5 hours of like dinner time, little play, or talking about how school went. And then when the pandemic came and it was a full day with the child, and then there are different moods that the child expresses, different behaviors that the child showcases, and then I think parents did find it, like some parents did find it a struggle as well at that point of time. So I think sometimes the challenge comes from probably having that curiosity as well. How do I engage my child to be occupied? How do I engage my child in play? Like Paran mentioned earlier, parents struggle to understand how to play with their child. What does it mean to play with my child? They probably have that expectations that, oh, I want my child to learn this during this period of time, or let the child be exposed to this kind of things. But ultimately, the play element, between the child and parent is just purely the interaction. It's purely that attachment, the bond that you have with your child. that should be the focus. And sometimes that ultimately becomes the challenge, because parents may have expectations, or parents expect to do certain things to provide for that child during that whole day. Yeah. So I think that's probably one of the challenges that adults face during that time period.
No, thank you very much for that, because when you started putting down the numbers, I just started remembering, like, okay, so when everything was back normal, my son used to be in school 8 to 3, and then he was in out of school care till about 5:30. Then I pick him up, and then we had time till about 9 o'clock before he was completely asleep. So we had about 2 hours every day is the time that I actually had to spend with him.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there was a moment in time where it was, wow, I have to actually spend from 8 a.m. all the way till 9 p.m. for the whole week.
Yeah.
And my answer for it was getting a dog to help me with the process of keeping him entertained. But I'm sure that that's probably not the right solution in many ways. But that was what I did. Samantha, your thoughts on both the children and the adults as we go through it, because I know you have pets as well. So
just as an aside, I must say pet therapy is something that I find that really helps kids and adults too. Being a parent myself, and you spoke about time. I think the biggest challenge that adults face is time. Even though during the pandemic we were at home, we were still working from home. So we had to look after our kids. We had to play teacher. We had to play aftercare teacher. We had to play doing the normal homework stuff. We had to then be entertainer. We had to be cook. We had to be cleaner. And we still had our normal day-to-day work on top of that, and I think that time is a challenge for us. Even returning to normal functioning, when not in lockdown, it's about how do we create quality time with our kids. We're so busy doing this and doing that and running around and stressed with work that I think we miss out on the basics, like my colleagues were saying. Play is so important, and it's not entertaining them. I said to my kids this weekend, I am not here to entertain you. It's not about entertaining them. It's about engaging with them. It's about being fully present with them in that moment, giving them your 100% attention. It's about putting the phone down. It's about forgetting that dinner has to be cooked. It's about forgetting about the work stress and just being present and listening to them. If you pick up a doll and you play with your kids, listen to the stories that they tell you, because those stories are so important. Kids communicate through stories. And in those stories, they will tell you what is happening in their lives. If we can take the time out just to listen and understand. And I think that as adults, as parents, we need to be able to just be mindful.
thank you for that. Pardon, would you, I know you gave your thoughts on that on the children's side. What about the parents, the adult side?
I think actually, before I even give my points, my thoughts on this, I actually wanted to know what was your sense when you had a segmentized 2 hours spending time with my son to 9 hours or 10 hours, How was that for you?
Like, to be honest, this is good, because I think what I struggled most was, like, I will tell you that I have a good relationship with my son. Like, we've always had a good relationship with my son. I think the issue was when he didn't, like, we had a small section where it was complete lockdown. The schools were closed. There was no studying happening. and I was still kind of working from home, and he would come to me, just look at me and go, Dad, can I watch TV? And I go like, well, no, you're not watching TV, because we have decided there's a limit of maybe 2 hours of TV. And then he just gives you this look going like, okay, so what do I do then? And I go like, okay, I have no idea how to respond to that question. And it took me a while to actually, so I would make him do things like, okay, go clean the house, go do things like the chores that needed to get done. But it was only when I had to actually step back a little bit and go like, well, he's not learning anything out of this. He's not, we're not connecting. He's just doing stuff, and he's going through the motions. So then we started making a chart of here are the things that we're going to do from the morning. I'm going to work for a certain period of time. I'm going to book all my meetings in that, and that's the time you're going to watch TV. Then I'm going to, let's go for a walk together. That means no phones, nothing. We're going to go and have a walk. And here's a kid that, even though he was like 7 years old, he was always scared to ride a bike. The fact is that he was not scared to ride a bike. I didn't have time prior to that to actually teach him how to ride a bike. And all of a sudden, like, it was a lot of crying and everything, because he was like, I'm going to fall off the bike. I'm going to fall off the bike. And 10 minutes later, he's like zooming away in a bike. Like, it was that shift in things, but it was the time and effort that I had to actually spend time. We did a lot of things like the cooking and everything. He just got involved in it, and we were doing things together. So even though I was doing certain things, it was with him, and I think that helped with our bonding in many ways. But I actually then started realizing that the work pays the bills, and it does those things. But at the end of the time, I actually had more fun because I was able to connect with my son, which is one of the type of relationships I did not have with my parents, with my dad. And I envy people that have that type of relationship with their parents, and so on. And I'm like, this is me hoping that in future I can have that type of relationship with my son in many ways. So thanks for turning the panelists to panel around and questioning me on this.
Yeah, but that's actually to me, that sounded very, very inspirational. It sounded very, and I could actually probably sense that sort of happiness that when you actually describing that sort of moments and being there, being present for him, and that's very, very reflective parenting, right? That's very, very attuned parenting. So that's actually what's lacking, right? That's probably what provides lots of dysfunction to families, when parents are not able to provide the sort of attuned parenting and reflective parenting. We naturally, like how you were probably initially, that you probably went into what I would probably call an anxious mode. There's a need to be in control, and then the parent in you comes out, and then subsequently you went on this reflective mode, and you started engaging the child. And I guess that would probably be child's play for you, because it's something that you kind of enjoyed, the whole process as you kind of rewind back, right? And I could see so much of joy and happiness, right? So if parents stop becoming so anxious and not be focused on having the sort of goals and stuff like that, and just do exactly like what you have done, I think it kind of solves lots of issues,
Well, I have the flip problem now, because my son's like, I don't want enough time with you anymore. Like, he's going like, you spend too much time with me. I want to go do my own stuff now. So
yeah, so I think that's interesting. That's an interesting take, right? Because normally kids would want to, normally parents would want their kids to be playing with their friends and stuff like that, and you now find lots of joy, right? And that's actually exactly what happened to me last week. I think last Monday, actually, I brought my daughter to school, and I actually enjoyed the process, and that's why I actually came back yesterday night and asking her whether I could go out with her again, because it's such a beautiful process. You know, the beautiful process of me just holding a tiny hand and walking down the street and speaking to her and stuff like that. It's amazing. It's something that, you know, you can't quantify. You know, so I think when parents are not able to kind of, this is how I expect my child to be, this is how I think it should be done and stuff, you know, that sort of boxed up view. And so there's a need to be there's a need to be in control of the situation. And what something like what COVID-19 does to us, it throws everything. It becomes like a curveball, right? It becomes a curveball because you don't even know what's going to happen the next day, right? So that's anxiety provoking. Not only for the child, because the child is now isolated away from her school and her environment, his environment. It also provides that sense of anxiety of what parents may be undergoing. Many layers of anxiety. Am I going to be assured of my work? You know, there's this economic crisis that's looming and stuff like that. How am I going to take care of my children? How am I going to cope with work? How am I going to face my family members 24 hours a day and all this stuff? You know, it's super anxiety provoking. You know, so that's a huge challenge that actually parents go through. And so the externalizing comes from the externalization that actually happens is through that increased number of quarrels and you know, children getting beaten up and yeah. So if they engage from a very reflective stance, you know, being grounded, giving that sort of safe space and containment, even at that point of time, it becomes a huge learning.
Okay, like amazing, because I think you've given me a segue into one question here, and I know we've talked about the pandemic situations in a few pieces, but I think what people really want to know, and I think I also want to know this, is what can we do to support children and adults to talk, where we can be open, we can connect with each other, and kind of like have a better life. So Samantha, I'm going to start this with you because like this is part of the whole component is we all want to live a happy life. We want to be that happy person, but sometimes we just don't know how to do it. So tell us what are the things, that suggestions that we can go about in terms of doing this?
I think for me, it's about going back to basics. You know, like you said, put the technology away, put the phones away, put the iPads away, put the TV away, go out into the garden and kick a ball. You know, it's the basics. Put your child on a bicycle and teach them how to ride it. I love your story, Alex. I think it is an amazing, touching story of how we need to find time. We need to find time to spend that quality time with our kids, because it gives back to us as well as adults and as parents. When we see that joy on their face, when we hear that laughter, when we see the way they look at us with love and admiration, it gives back to us as well. You know, it allows us to play. It allows us to feel safe. It allows us to forget about the stresses. And in a way, it's a way for us to also feed back to ourselves when we take the time out to spend with our kids. And it's not, you know, it's not a kind of rocket science that you have to carve out activities to do. No, it's like you said, let them join you while you're making dinner. Give them a potato peeler and get them to peel the potatoes, and let them engage their natural childlike curiosity and ask you questions about what you're cooking and why you're putting that in and why are you doing that, and take the time to look them in the eyes and answer those questions. You know, I think we get so busy with our lives that sometimes when our kids are asking us questions, we get irritated. It's like a nuisance in the background. but there's a reason they're engaging with us. They want your attention. And it's just to slow down, just slow down, and take the time out and listen to them and engage with them.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. Paran, on to you to tell me a little bit about this particular topic. I want to know your thoughts on this. Did we lose him?
Yeah.
Tibia, why don't you step? Oh no. Okay, he's there. Come on.
I think just like what Samantha said, I think sometimes the simplest, non-complex things probably works the best. And you know, what I would like to re-emphasize is when you're actually working with young children, it's a 3 to 2 to 6, 7, where there's a lot of emotional development and attachment that's actually going on for the kids. There's so, you know, simple stuff. You know, for example, what I do with my kid is actually I like throw her on the bed. I kind of play catching with her, you know, making her catch, getting her to catch me and stuff like that. Simple stuff. So not going on the iPads and stuff. And probably, and even though there are times where I actually engage her using the iPad, but I think the one that probably gives me lots of joy and happiness is you know, doing the tumbling and stuff. And I think allowing them the safe space to talk. You know, I think kids are super intelligent. You know, and if you allow them to talk, if you allow them to converse, they take you into their world. And probably their world is a world where there is probably no anxiety, and you know, a child who's regulated well enough, there's no anxieties, and it's such a mystical and beautiful world. So as much as it suits the child, it also gives this sense of soothing and this sense of emotional regulation to us. You know, so you know, I think there's no. This is how it should be done. You know, I think there's no logarithm, should I say? Because if we kind of box it up, then that's what makes everything a bit more complex, right? Because then as human beings, we tend to go after success and whatnot. And so when there is a successful box, this is what the box entails, then every other parent then goes after it. You know, and so what leads into understanding what the child needs is actually like what you did, is getting to know the child. You know, it's essentially getting to know the child. So it's I do not think it's one size fits all. And because we as human beings, we are very, very fluid in nature, we are flexible in nature, right? And like just what like Samantha said earlier, the child's brain is so malleable, you know, so it's so flexible. So simple things, you know, I you know, sometimes when I cook, I get my daughter to throw in like a dash of salt and what, making her feel that sort of accomplishment and stuff like that. Simple thing, and she's like, oh yes, I'm a chef. You know, not a chef, but yes, she gets that's the beauty of it. Absolutely. You know, yeah, giving them the sort of independence. I think there have been lots of times where I sometimes had chats with my fellow colleagues and sometimes even parents, where there's a need for parents to find a solution on how to engage the child. I think finding the solution would definitely be not a solution at all, because then it means boxing up again. So you like I said, you there should not be any form of inhibitions. There should not be any form of walls when you are interacting with your child. Yeah. So
yeah.
If that made sense.
No, that totally makes sense, because as you were talking, there were a few things popping up in my head, and I was like, okay, I'm going to talk about this, but I'm going to give Tibia first an opportunity to share her thoughts, and then I will touch base again. Tibia.
Like everyone kind of summarized the whole thing. Yeah, but I mean, I completely agree with all of you guys. Is in terms of connecting with the child, ideally, there's no one structure. There's no one format or strategy that parents have to follow or anything like that. And I think the part about parent mentioning about reflective parenting, I think that's the most, like, it's very ideal because you start to see, you start to open up to the child, or you start to understand the child's behavior a bit better. You know, you kind of see that, oh, this is why my child is behaving this way. This is what my child wants ultimately from me. Like you said, right? Your son constantly comes and or like asks you, Dad, do you love me? You know, this is ultimately that connection that you have is, you know, it's so, it's something that the child feels safe and open to talk to you about it. And that's probably because, you know, there's that reflective parenting, or that's that bond or attachment between both of you that probably has led him to be so open to ask such questions. I think, like you said previously, you know, when you were growing up, probably this is something you might have had in your mind, but maybe it's not something that's so easy to ask to parents in the, you know, in back in the days or something like that. But I think, yeah, ultimately it just boils down to going back to basics. You know, when you're interacting with the child, I think Samantha spoke about being present. And I think that's really, really crucial because, you know, we may think we are putting time aside to play with the children. But when we are not fully present over there, the minute the attention goes away, they start to feel like it's missing. And then there's that break between the child and the parent. And I think being fully present with the child and engaging with how the child wants to play, letting it be child-led, understanding their stories when they're playing, I think that gives so much insights to parents or adults that's working with the child. And I think that essentially helps to connect both the parent and child easily.
Yeah. No. It's interesting because I'm going to throw it down to the panelists in a bit, but a few things that you guys said, really the being present and reflective parenting are things that maybe I want to give a little bit of an ideology behind some of this myself, because my son plays hockey and he goes out into the ice rink and he plays it. And I'm sitting in the bleachers sometimes, and it's 40 to 60 minutes of a game that they're playing, and they're intense games that are happening. But every single time he comes out, there's always a chance he's going to ask me like, Dad, I did see you on the phone. And I go like, I just looked at my phone like for 2 minutes, but he's seen that in that stress of the game, he's still watching and he's observing things. And I think that part was the part about being present. And I think him able to tell that to me was one of the things I enjoy. But it took time. It really took time because I grew up with parents who were they're loving parents. It's just they had a different ideology on how they were bringing up their kids. Getting a hug from them or anything was like, if they ever try and hug me, and they do try now, and it's the most weirdest sensation ever because we're not used to it. But my son at 3.5 was straight off was like, Dad, you need to hug me. Otherwise, I don't know that you love me. And I was like, well, I'm not used to hugging, but now I'm a hugger. I like doing that. And I'm used to doing it, but I can't do it still with my parents because we don't have that connection. So being that like that term reflective parenting really stood out for me through this conversation. So anyway, considering the time, I'm just going to give it back to the audience here to say, do you have any questions for the panelists? Feel free to switch off your mic and means unmute yourself and then ask the questions. I'm going to give a few minutes for that. So please do so. Any questions? I'm not seeing any takers here yet, so. If not, I think I'd like to thank the speakers. Like, you guys did an amazing job. I really enjoyed the conversation. To be honest, I really did. There was a part of me that was going like, okay, I might get into some of those clinical talks, and I'm not a doctor in any of these things. I might not be able to have some of those conversations, and I had kept my phone on the side here just to like come up with some fancy psychological terms just in case. But I loved how the conversation came, and the insights that came through this discussion totally made me think about a few things and a few more topics of conversation that we would like to have. I really appreciate the time that all three of you have taken. Tibia and Paran out from Singapore. It's Friday afternoon. You could be doing something much better, but you chose to be here and being part of this conversation. Samantha, you're just starting your day, so hopefully we don't ruin it by this conversation, but it's been amazing that I've had a chance to get to know you through the last little while, and being able to have this type of a conversation and open discussion. So thank you very much for your time, your insights, and being part of this panel with Next Evolution Ventures.
Thank
Do you guys
so
have
much
any
for-
final comments? Yeah, I was going to throw it back
so
at you.
thank you so much for having us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So any final comments for the audience?
I think this was very reflective for us as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Tibia said. I think it's very, very reflective process. And I saw the clip that you actually posted about with you and the interaction with you and your son, and I thought it was such an embodied process. You know, then that's what we are looking. That's what we are asking for from parents. You know, don't keep reminding yourself that you are parents. You know, be the child that your child wants, and when that happens, and then this sort of magic happens. And wish everyone a good weekend, and thanks for having us.
That was totally by chance that video happened. We were driving back from school, and we came across this, and I was like, oh, this is perfect opportunity. Let me try and see if I can make something out of it. But we have a number of conversations planned for this year on the topic of raising a mental health awareness, as well as racism in the society and community. Go to our website, nextevolutionventures.ca. You'll see the upcoming events. I'd like to thank again all our panelists and for this amazing conversation, and every one of you that chose to attend and be part of this. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe. We're still in this pandemic, but we're in this together. Just stay safe, and see you in some of our other panels. So with that, I will call this to a close. Again, Tibia, Paran, and Samantha, amazing conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.